Sam is a Texas Parks and Wildlife urban biologist. And I met Sam. You probably don't remember this, Sam, but when I was starting my Master Naturalist in 2014, you were working at the Mansfield Park. What is the name of that park?
Oliver
You were
Nature
there.
Park. Oliver Nature
Oh,
Park.
thank you. Oliver Nature Park. And I was sitting next to Linda Gilly, who was in my class, and we were just enthralled. You are one of the best presenters I know of, and we loved it. We had a great time. You were probably talking about iNaturalist then, and we went around the park with you, and so I see Sam, or used to see Sam a lot at Master Naturalist meetings and Native Plant Society meetings, and just walking in Tandy Hills. So we'll get back there. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you today. And Sam, if you need to tell us more about yourself, you just go right ahead. I'm going to quit sharing and then let you have the screen.
Awesome. And so good to see you,
Thank
Kim. So good to
you.
see so many names of folks that I know. Great to see y'all. I wish I could be there with you all, hugging you all in person, but this is the next best thing. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Hopefully you are able to see that. I am going to go to that. And again, I hope you're able to see that okay. So good to see, again, many familiar names. Enjoyed those presentations earlier. Bill had mentioned some of the upcoming BioBlitz, so I can talk a little bit about that too. But I'm going to spend most of the time talking about something in the past few years that I've gotten pretty bonkers about, and it's moths. So I'm seeing okay, good. Moths are pretty amazing. They are tremendously amazing. And it's one of those things that they're just waiting for us to appreciate them. So I'm going to go over some of the neat moths that we have in Texas. I'm going to talk how it all relates to native plants. I'll also be a little hesitant with stepping on other folks' toes, because I know that you have Rufus talking about it, and a little bit about birds and their uses with native plants. And I knew you had Allison talking earlier about some of the coevolution of the plants and their predators. But I'm going to talk specifically about moths. And I don't know if it's because of the pandemic. I don't know if it's because I'm almost 40-year-old. I don't know if I'm having like these existential issues lately, but there's been a big word that has been something I've been focused on lately. And it's a simple word, but it's a pretty deep word. And it's the word is why. WHY. Why? Why do we do what we do? Why am I here? You know, it's some of those existential questions that I've been kind of wrestling with lately, maybe. But it's a big thing that we should all wrestle with. Why do we do what we do? And as native plant aficionados, as native plant fans, the question of why do we use native plants? Why do we have a landscape at all? These are big questions that we should tackle. And with native plants, and I'm a native plant guy myself, I'm a plant guy. Kim mentioned earlier for me to talk a little bit about my background. My background is in plants. Before it was in plants, I was actually into gophers, you know, the little rodents that form mounds all over sandy areas in Texas and around the United States. I studied gophers for my thesis, the genetics of gophers. After that, I actually worked at BRIT, the Botanical Research Institute of Texas. And it's there that I really fell for plants. I worked in the herbarium, and you know, my buddies would bust my chops about working in the herbarium because my day was filled with filing. So that's what I would do. I would file. And again, my buddies would bust my chops because I'd say, yeah, I filed for 6 hours today. But when you're filing plant specimens from the west side of Mount Kilimanjaro, or when you're filing a plant specimen collected by Ferdinand Lindheimer, his hands grabbed that plant. When you're filing a plant specimen from Indian territory in the early 1800s, it's a pretty cool feeling. It's a neat feeling. It's also a place where you learn the plants. If you file sorghum halepensi, sorghum halepensi, sorghum halepensi, sorghum halepensi, pretty soon you know what sorghum halepensi looks like, or Johnson grass. So I loved my time there at Britt, and I became very narrowly focused on plants. And it was a good thing, but I was somewhat oblivious to everything else. I was so tunnel visioned on plants that I kind of forgot about everything. And the things that would eat the plants, I would just flick them off as things that were eating the target species that I was interested in. So one of the things that I've started doing as I've grown as a naturalist is recognize the plants for their wildlife values. And in my own backyard and in the parks that I explore, I will find these plants that I still really, really enjoy, but I also view them as the foundations of the habitat, as things that other critters are utilizing. And in our own backyards or in our favorite parks, in our areas that we have maybe some control of the landscape, let's recognize that these plants that we are using are being used for other critters besides ourselves. And it's how our native plants are different than our vegetables. You know, when we put in a vegetable garden, we put in those plants to harvest things from them. So we are the main users of a vegetable garden. And when something is attacking our tomato plant, or when something is nibbling on our corn or on our okra, we typically flick that off because we don't want them to harvest what we want to harvest for our dinner or for our snack. With native plants, we are putting these in for not just ourselves, but for other critters. And in some cases, we have to hold back our little thumb and our fingers from flicking these things off that are utilizing those plants. And I would argue, and I hope my challenge for you is to look for some of the other critters that are using our native plants. And you know, it's not just pollinators. Yes, I hope that you are enjoying some of the bees and the wasps and wilts. I'm hearing you right now. You may want to mute your video. You know, the pollinators, yes, they are utilizing our plants, but also there are other critters that are utilizing them for their meals. And there is a universe that exists in our backyards, in our front yards, in our favorite parks that have some of this landscaping that we can help manage. When I normally give this presentation, I talk about moths as winged bird food, or prior to having wings, they're crawling bird food, or prior to them emerging from their shell, they are stationary bird food. So yes, they are food for so many critters. They're food for birds. I'm not going to talk too much about it. I know Rufus is going to talk about this right after my presentation, but they are the foundation, along with our plants, for so many other critters. So let's talk about the importance of our moths. And you know, it's kind of weird to talk about life goals, but the life goal of a moth is to be food. You know, it's kind of a weird thing to put on a plaque. Is I made it to someone's belly today, but that's kind of the point for moths. And maybe goal is not the right word. Maybe it's more role than goal. But that is their function in the ecosystem, is they are food. They are food for so many different critters, much like our plants are. And all stages in the life cycle of moths and of these lepidopterans is food. So they are food for other animals. And I don't mean to patronize you with the somewhat elementary picture of the food web here, but just looking at the caterpillars and their position in this food web, this elementary picture here. But you can see that they're right there in the middle. They're eating our plants and they are food. They're extending that energy that they got from the plants throughout the ecosystem. John Muir has this quote, I love it. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. So when we try to remove a little critter, we see that entire food web shift, that it's linked with all of these other critters. So it's an important thing when we remember that when we put in plants, it's not just for our enjoyment, but it's also crucial in the ecosystem as food for the other things that are food for other things. And it's kind of funny when I do some black lighting in my backyard, and I have a couple cats inside the house, and they are always looking at the door because they know when I open that door, a few critters make their way inside. So they love that. They love to catch the little moths and crane flies that come in. And sometimes my wife hollers at me too with the moths that are getting inside. She is a fabric collector. I would position the camera around, but she would yell at me. But she collects a lot of fabric. So there's tons and tons of fabric in our home. And she worries that some of these moths may get into the fabric. And maybe you too have experienced this. You have a favorite sweater, you open up the closet, and oh no, what are these little tiny holes? And it's true that a few of our moth species do feed on wool, do feed on cotton, and get inside and utilize our fabrics and our cloths. However, proportionally, it's very small. Very few moths actually do that. Some of them are agricultural pests, though. And you may have seen Doppler radars of moth migrations or the moth movements too. There are quite a few moths out there in numbers, maybe not in species, but in abundance, in biomass, that attack our fields of corn or attack some of our agricultural fields. And they can be pretty tremendous pests for those as well. But again, those are the ones that are food for birds and food for bats. You may have heard about our bumper crop of army worms this year. And chime in on the chat if you had any army worms that got into your landscaping and nibbled some of your plants. Yeah, we had a bumper crop of army worms, the little caterpillars that move around. And that's a good thing, because of that bumper crop of army worms, we're likely going to see bumper crops of other critters that eat those army worms. So just to tell you about the life cycle of our moths, and again, I don't do this to patronize you. I'm sure that you know the life cycle of many of these critters, but we'll go over it and talk about the uses in the ecosystem of all of these stages. We'll start out with the egg. And with our moths, with our most of our lepidopterans, they can produce more than one egg. Most of them, I think all of them, don't have a parental care system. So they lay their egg and then they fly off to be food for something. So mom and dad are now in the tummy of a bird. Yeah, it's rough being a moth, I guess. The multiple eggs, typically multiple eggs that are laid by our moths, sometimes they will lay in these egg masses. And in some cases, they're laying on a specific plant. So they'll have a host species that they will use, and they'll lay those eggs all over the place. Not always. Sometimes we'll have moths that just lay them on the side of a foundation or a house or on our front porch. Kind of just hoping, good luck, kids. Hope you find the right plant to eat. And one of the first meals that our caterpillars or the young moths get is the eggshell, that high protein eggshell. That may be the first meal that they get to get the energy to either find the plant that they're searching for, their host plant, or to move around and get away from some of their brothers and sisters, their potential competition. So we'll start with after the egg, we'll have the caterpillars or the larval stage. And as I mentioned earlier, some of our moths, not all of them, some of our moths are generalists, but many of them are specialists. So they will be attacking or utilizing just one species or a group, a family, a plant family of plants to get their meal, to get their nutrition, their energy to excel in the ecosystem. You may have had it earlier with the monarchs. Many of us know about the monarchs and their relationship with milkweed. And that's a pretty cool host and predator relationship. But it exists with a lot of our moths. A lot of our lepidopterans have their specific plant that they will utilize. What do caterpillars do? Well, they eat. That is kind of their life goal, is to eat food. Their life role may be to be food, but their life goal is to eat as much as possible. So they eat and they poop. And, you can sort of make some connections with each other, eat and poop. That's kind of what some critters do. And our caterpillar, that is what they are spending their existence doing, eating and eating and eating, getting enough energy to make it to their next stage. So we have the egg, we have our larval stage or the caterpillar, and then we'll have the pupa stage or the pupal stage. And in moths, we typically call this the cocoon. For many of our moths, it is on the ground or in leaf litter. Several of our caterpillars have silk structures that they will use to either hold on to the different leaves or material around them, or they'll actually create their own silk cocoon. I like to say, leave the leaves. This is a good thing for the ecosystem when we leave the leaves, or at least leave some of the leaves. There was a funny meme that I saw the other day that leaves are not plotting murder or anything like that. So we can leave some of them. We want to think that it's just, let's get rid of them. They turn into soil, so they're not plotting our murder. So we can leave some of those, hopefully, in our landscaping. It's good for breaking down the soil, adding carbon to the ecosystem, but also they are the perfect habitat for many of our caterpillars and the cocoon stage of our moths. And then we'll have the adult stage here. And it can be quite short for some, maybe even a week. Some of our moth species have vestigial mouth parts, or they don't even eat as adults. They use all of the energy that they got from their larval stage to exist as an adult. And one of the things that, or a couple of the things that they do, they find the mate and they lay eggs. So that's essentially what their purpose is, the adult stage, finding that mate and then laying eggs. So to persist that species. They're in the group Lepidoptera, Lepido meaning scaly, and Patera meaning wings. So they have the scales on their wings. There's some fun discussion on the evolutionary significance of these scales. Sure, it might be used for sexual selection. The prettier that you look for your potential mate gives you extra success, extra fitness there. There's also some discussion that that could have been a predator defense, that these scales are removable. So if they were to fly into a spider web, they could leave some of the scales and fly off from that potential predator. So perhaps there's some evolutionary significance to their losability of these scales. I won't go too much into the taxonomy of these, the phylogeny of them, but one of my favorite books called For Love of Insects by Thomas Eisner, who's a chemical ecologist, he talks about moths versus butterflies as he talks about the Romans and the barbarians. That during the Roman period, the Romans would consider themselves, well, the Romans, and then everyone else that wasn't a Roman was a barbarian. So you have the Romans, and then everybody else was the barbarians. And this is kind of how we think of butterflies versus moths, that we have our butterflies, and then the moths are everyone else. But the reality is that moths, or the barbarians, that's where all the diversity is. There is so much diversity of moths, way more diversity of moths than there are of butterflies. Generally speaking, moths are nocturnal, so they're active at night, whereas our butterflies tend to be diurnal or active during the day. There are some antenna differences on our moths versus butterflies. Most of our moths have either linear, sort of straight antenna, or filiform antenna with some extra little filaments on them, whereas our butterflies typically have a clubbed antenna. A neat way that we can tell boy versus girl moths is the antennas of our males typically are more filiform, or they have a lot more of these little filaments coming off of them. Our antenna, if you don't know about bugs, the antenna are filled with chemoreceptors, much like what's in our nose. So the more surface area that you have on your antenna, the more chemoreceptors that will be there. So you're able to sort of smell the pheromones of females out there. So it's a fun way to tell a male from a female moth. Look at those antennae. If you see a lot of filaments, it's probably a male. And just like I said with the Romans and the barbarians, there are way more barbarians than there are Romans. Globally, give or take around 160,000 species of moths. A lot of moth diversity. And I think with butterflies, it may be like 10,000 or something like that. I don't know the exact number, but proportionally, there's a lot more species of moths than there are butterflies. In the United States, there's give or take 13,000 species that we have. And in Texas, I've seen different numbers here, but around 5,000 species that we have of moths just within the state of Texas. And, you know, we throw around numbers like millions and thousands and hundreds all of the time. We throw around these numbers. But when we sit down and we think about a number like 1,000 or like 5,000, let's look at it for a second. How many of those 5,000 can you name? You know, how many can you name? And with plants, you know, I'm talking to a lot of plant folks here. There's give or take 5,000 species of plants in Texas. How many can you name? I mean, if you were to sit down all day, do you think you could name 100, 200, 1,000 maybe? Well, there's even more than that. So these numbers like 5,000, that is a lot. It is a lot of diversity, and it's something to be celebrated. So let's look at some of the different moths that we have here in Texas. And there are some of these somewhat arbitrary groupings of microleps and macroleps, or big ones and little ones. There are some crossovers on those two. Some of them, when I say little, I mean little. This chinkapin leaf miner, which we have here in north central Texas and in East Texas too, that sucker's 3 or 4 millimeters. So I don't know if you can see that, but that's tiny. That is very, very, very tiny. Some of them are big, like our black witch, and this one, give or take 7 inches of a wingspan. And if you've ever seen these before, it looks like a bird that is flying around, or a bat that's flying around. It's a monster. It's a beast. So there is a whole spectrum of sizes of our leps, or of our moths. Kim was mentioning it earlier. Bill was mentioning it too. I'm bonkers about this tool of iNaturalist. I'll go into that in just a little bit. But on iNaturalist, we collectively, we citizen scientists, have documented around 3,000 of the species of moths, give or take 3,000 species of moths in Texas that we've documented so far. So let's look at some of the showier ones, some of the more interesting ones, and maybe, and I'm watching some of the chat too, if you wouldn't mind, type in a yes if you've seen some of these before. Okay, so let's make it kind of interactive here. Or you can raise your hand, or you don't have to unmute yourself, but you can just yell yes if you want. But let's start with the Polyphemous moth. Have you ever seen this one before? It's a whopper. It's a big one, named after the Cyclops Polyphemus from the Odyssey or the Iliad, one of those two. It was one of the Cyclops that when Odysseus came, Odysseus introduced himself as no body and jabbed a big staff through Polyphemus's eye. And then Polyphemus was yelling for his dad, who was Poseidon. He yelled, "Nobody got my eye. Nobody got my eye." Anyway, Polyphemus, a cool Cyclops from Greek mythology. But when we look at this big old moth, you can see the cyclopean eyes on those wings, that each wing has the single eye of the Cyclops. So if you look at just one of them at a time. Really, really cool moths. They're a type of silk moth, and these have vestigial mouth parts. In other words, they don't eat. They cannot eat as adults. What do they do as adults? Well, they fly around. They look to see if they can find another potential Polyphemous moth, hopefully of the opposite sex. They mate and they lay eggs. I'm looking at the chat here. Look at those antennae. What do you think? Boy or girl? Or boy, male, girl, female? What do you think on this one? Good. I see some of those filamentose antenna. So, yep, this looks like a boy to me. So it has all of those chemoreceptors to smell the potential female that's hopefully nearby. All right, how about this one? A Luna moth. And in the chat, if you're lucky enough to have seen a Luna moth, type in a yes there, and type in yes with pride if you have seen one. I go out with some other mothers or mothlings, people that look at moths, and several of those folks just drool with envy when I tell them that I have seen a Luna moth before. So showy. These are truly beautiful moths. These Luna moths, they're eating sweet gum. They also feed on the Juglandaceae, or the pecans and the walnuts. That's some of their host plants. But typically, if I'm remembering correctly, it's the sweet gum is their main host plant. So we see them mostly in East Texas, but we get them sometimes throughout Central Texas as well. Beautiful, beautiful moth, and just tremendous if you get to see one in real life. Now you may notice some little filaments on the top there. So I think this one is probably male, although the females may have some of those filaments as well. Not all of our moths are nocturnal. Some of them are either diurnal or crepuscular, active at dawn and dusk. And if you have a question, I definitely will hit those questions later on. So Carrie, I see that you have your hand raised, or maybe it's just your hand raised that you've seen one of these in real life, and go ahead and type a yes if you've seen one of these in real life, maybe visiting some of your lantana, some of your verbena, some of your glandularia, things that have the little tubular flower tubes. They tend to be more active at dawn and dusk. These are also in this group, the Sphinx moths. Boy, they love tomatoes, and they love things in the nightshade family. And when I was a little kid, my dad would pay me $0.25 for every one of those tomato hornworms that I would kill, because a tomato hornworm, they will just demolish a tomato plant in a day, in a couple days. They are gluttons. Well, they're getting enough energy to make it to their adult stage. Now, these are also active feeders. So they are nectar visitors. They are utilizing that saccharose, the nectar from the plants, because they're expending a lot of energy beating those wings. And I love these moths. They're really beautiful. And if you've seen one before, you've seen that movement of those wings. It's like a hummingbird. And there are the hummingbird moths that are in this same family that flap those wings super, super fast. And it's just so cool. How about this guy, the Io moth? Type a yes if you've seen this one in real life. Io moths. Have you ever seen one before? Also, take a look at those antennae. What do you think on this one? Boy or girl, or male or female? With this one, not many filaments on there. So this female doesn't really need to sniff too much, but she'll be exuding a lot of pheromones. And I just gave it away. Yes, this is a female, likely a female here. Called the Io moth because of those huge eyes that exist, or the eye mimics that exist on those hind wings. When they're resting during the day, they will have those forewings, or the top wings, that will cover those eyes. But if they get spooked, they show those eyes off. And if I'm a bird and I see something that has huge eyes that are bigger than my head, I'm going to freak out. So this is one of the ways that it keeps itself safe, that it uses that mimicry to try to scare off potential predators. How about this one? Has anybody seen a black witch before, or Mariposa del Muerte? If you've seen one of these, okay, be careful. There is some fun mythology about this, that if you see one of these, either you're going to die or you're going to win the lottery. And I don't know if you get to choose which one. So just FYI. There's also another myth that it flies over you, that you're going to go bald. And there's some more romantic myths around this, that it's a recent loved one that just passed that is visiting you and saying goodbye, that if you see one. So a lot of romantic ones. I don't know if the losing the hair or dying is quite as romantic as a recent loved one that comes to visit you. But this one, really neat mythology of this, arguably the largest moth that we get in Texas, the black witch Mariposa del Muerte. Really, really cool. And they're also, their host plant, I believe, gosh, I should have looked this up. I think it's Texas ebony. So one of our South Texas plants. They can move, they can fly around. So we'll see these guys throughout Texas every now and then. And on a naturalist, it's quite common to see observations of this because it's such a unique critter too. Alianthus Webworm. So this is one, if you're familiar with the name Alianthus, Alianthus is actually one of our exotic or non-native invasive species, the tree of heaven, which I hate that name. It's a hellish tree, but the Alianthus webworm predates that plant. And there's some question on if this species is actually native too, or if it's just moving along with the plant. This one, you may have seen it visiting some of your plants during the day too. And again, just chime a yes if you've seen this one. I like this moth because it's somewhat showy. It's got those orange and yellow and black colors to it too. It is a nectar visitor, so it actively flies around and visits some of our flowers. There is some question on are moths pollinators? And there may be some incidental pollination that occurs there. You know, some of them do have fuzzy arms and legs, and maybe a pollen grain gets picked up here or there, but probably they're not the best of our pollinators. Again, their main purpose in the ecosystem, it sounds horrible, but it's to be food. It's really to be food for things that would eat them. So they may do some pollination, but it may be more incidental than an active pollination like our bees and our wasps and beetles. How about this guy? Have you ever seen a southern flannel moth before? And I'll show you this, which is the adult moth. Very fuzzy, very beautiful, really, really pleasant. But if I show you the caterpillar, maybe you're a bit more familiar. This one, the walking toupee of this larval stage, this is the asp caterpillar. They predate on oak trees. When I was a kid, we had a tree house in a big old oak. And for whatever reason, and maybe they knew what they were doing, they would always rest at the top ladder level. And I, as a little kid, a little young whippersnapper, I would be outside running to the treehouse, and I'd run to the top of it, put my little hand up there, and almost always I would get a rash from the stinging hairs of this caterpillar. It's just a predation, or it's just an adaptation to prevent predation. They have those toxic stinging hairs. So yeah, these can be a little frustrating, but I say, look at the adults. I mean, they're so cool. They're so charming as adults. So I'll tolerate them as caterpillars too. And every once in a while, we'll have population bumps or bumper years of these. And I get lots of calls about what are these things? Little walking toupees. The Moonseed Moth. I mentioned earlier how some, if not many, of our moth species are host specific. And this one is host specific on our moon seeds, or the Carolina snail seed, Cocculus caroliniana. So this is one, if you have that little vine in your landscape, recognize that not only are the berries good for the birds, but the vine is great for these really charming moths. And again, chime in with a yes if you've seen these before. And it's one of these moths that is typically well hidden during the day, that you have to go out mothing, not necessarily, but usually you have to go out mothing to see these and appreciate them at night. Beautiful, just so charming how when you look at the scales on the wings, they have all of these really cool colors. Some moths have interesting postures. So I don't know what the yoga pose is here. And I see Mary, who is a yoga teacher here. I don't know if this is one of the poses that you go over in your classes. This one's pretty advanced. I mean, it's touching its tail, it's touching its hiney with its nose. So pretty advanced level yoga pose that this one has. This one is a really interesting one. It feeds on the Solanaceae, or the nightshades, the eggplants. It's what it feeds on, but you can see that unique pose that it has as too. Some of our moths, and I argue nature has played with the monochromatic brown or black or one color. Nature has played with it to create these really intricate patterns. This is one that blends in with lichen. So yes, you can see it on a white sheet, but if this is on a tree branch that has some lichen on it, it just blends in wonderfully with that. Speaking of lichen, this is one of our moth species that has caterpillars that feed on lichen. This is our lichen moth, or in this group lichen moths, the Cysthenes. And the caterpillars feed on lichen. Again, chime in with a yes if you've seen one of these in real life. A group that I'll talk about now is the emerald moths. The adults, really, really pretty. They're in this group called the geometrids, and geo meaning earth, metrid meaning measuring. The geometrids measure the earth. They're the inch worms. So the inchworms, the ones that do that kind of movement like that, they measure the earth with that movement, the geometrids. And they are cool. I mean, weird, amazing, magnificent. They're cool. Yes, the adults are pretty, but the caterpillars, their camouflage is mind-blowing. What they do you see it? Can you see the caterpillar here? Maybe, but if you're a potential predator, if you're a bird, you're flying around looking, oh, that's just another flower. There's probably not a delicious sausage on that flower. But what this little sausage is doing, it is taking off some of the petals or the ray flowers of its host plant, and it's gluing them on its back. And one of the other mind-blowing things to me is as they start to lose color, as they fall off, it will take new flowers and post them on its back. Ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Here's another example of a caterpillar that's using this liatris, this little gay feather right here, taking those petals or ray flowers here, disc flowers, whatever is available, gluing them on its back to blend in with the potential host plant. So cool, crazy cool. Some moths are just pretty. I mean, they are just pretty. A few folks may say that butterfly versus moth, we have one that's pretty and one that's not. But if you look at the ones that are not pretty up close, you can be blown away with Mona Lisas in nature. The sculptured moth is a beautiful example of nature just playing with the colors and the patterns there. Some moths are aquatic. Well, the adult stage may not be living in the water, but the caterpillar is. This is an aquatic caterpillar, is the larva of our Petrophila moths, in this case, the Jalisco Petrophila. Do you see what I see on this one? And you may have to sort of tilt your head a little bit to maybe see it, but some people see a jumping spider. And perhaps this is perhaps it's just our eyes playing tricks, or it may be an adaptation to keep other bugs or potential birds, potential predators away from this adult moth, that if it looks like a spider, it may bite. So you might be able to see the jumping spider on this Petrophila's wings. Really small one here, several millimeters here, but this one is a predator, potential predator, well, definite predator of our Chinese tallow trees. So there's some question on if this one is a native insect species. Probably not, but it is attacking some of our Chinese tallows. Now, it's probably not enough to use this as a biocontrol that it can control our Chinese tallow, which, if you're not familiar, that's a invasive species, a non-native exotic invasive species. But this one, what it does is the caterpillar goes inside of the leaf structure, and you can even see these mazes where the caterpillar goes inside of the epidermis and eats the mesoderm of our leaves. Really, really cool. Okay. Oh my goodness. I get too excited about moths, and I spend all my time talking about the cool ones. So let's say that you are now inspired, or you've always been inspired, to look at moths. I personify it, I romanticize it, I recognize that, but I think that they are just waiting for you. They're coming to your porch light every night, just waiting for you to go out and look at them and appreciate them. They're there. They're there. So let's do it. Let's go out. Let's look at some of them. Let's appreciate some of these critters that, again, I'm personifying it, but maybe you're whispering gratitude to the plants that we're using in our landscaping. So let's do it together. How do you do it? Where do you do it? When do you do it? Well, stay up. Stay up at night. And I kind of say this with a bit of warning that once you get started on mothing, you may never want to sleep again. You may just want to be active. You may want to stay up. It may mess with your sleep patterns. It does with mine. That if I'm out, I want to stay up to see the different moths that just showed up. So nighttime is the right time to look for our moths. Ideally, if you're in a place with low light pollution and you have a single light up, that's what draws in a lot of moths. In a lot of our areas like suburbia, if you're living in a neighborhood, there's quite a bit of light pollution, but you may still be surprised at how many different species of moths can come to your lights if you pay attention for it. Typically, the best results that you get with moth diversity is when the temperatures are higher than 60 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, in Texas, that's a lot of the year. And it's funny, even on some warm winter nights, I will put up the moth lights, and I'm pretty surprised at the things that show up, even in January, if it's give or take 60 degrees at night. How do you draw them in? And there's a really funny book called Why Moths Hate Thomas Edison. And it talks about those weird, unexplained things in nature. And one of them that we don't really know exactly why, but for whatever reason, moths and other nocturnal critters are drawn to lights. It may be that they are using lights as celestial bodies to navigate, to move around, maybe. Maybe it's that light seems sort of like the moon reflecting on a body of water. So potentially there's water there. Maybe it's that a few of them are attracted and start giving off pheromones that attract other, or a few moths or other nocturnal critters are attracted to them, and they give off pheromones that attract others. Maybe it's even the spectrum of light activates some of the chemoreceptors. There's a lot of potential possibilities of why they are attracted to light, but for whatever reason, they are attracted to lights. And this is something that we can, I don't know what the right word is, take advantage of, I guess. If we put out a light, we put out a chair, we wait for diversity to come to us. It's so much fun. For me, mothing is a party. And it's not just because of the biodiversity, but also because of the rave lights that I will use as I attract the moths. If you have UV lights or the black lights, this is a wider spectrum of light. And again, for whatever reason, they're more drawn to UV lights than they are to the incandescent bulbs that have a little bit more of a narrow spectrum. You can go all out with this. Some of the party lights that you can get at a party store, Halloween store right now, if you wait until after Halloween, they're probably going to go on discount. So getting some of those little UV lights, I have a little setup that I use that I got off of Amazon for like $10, a little UV light with a portable battery charge. I'll put that in my backpack and I'll be out walking around in the wilderness. We'll put it out there and attract some lights or attract some moths to the lights. Once you really get bitten by the mothing bug, you may invest a lot of money in it. And golly, I think I've spent probably a couple $1,000s on mothing gear with the portable batteries and with the lights. The UV lights on BioQuip are quite good. They are quite good. If you get really hardcore, the mercury vapor lights or the metal halide lights, huge spectrum of light. Yeah, they'll make you go blind, but in the meantime, you're going to see, if the last thing you see is moth diversity, I guess that's a good way to lose your sight. That's not a right thing to say, but the mercury vapors are powerful lights, and they can attract a whole bunch of different moths to those lights. I will put up a mirror behind my lights. Now, not the mirror that I look at, but a mirror of a white sheet. And the white sheet acts kind of like a reflective mirror, blasting that light back out that I reflect from the sheet. The higher percentage cotton is typically a little bit better for that reflection. So a white sheet is really good to go get. Now, to document some of these things, and again, with a lot of our moths that are really tiny, I showed you that chinkapin leaf miner at the beginning that's 2 or 3 millimeters. You got to really zoom in to look at it. And cameras are a great way for us to zoom in on these things. So I will use a little headlamp or a flashlight, and then I will use my point and shoot camera, just the standard point and shoot camera, and zoom in on it. If you have macro capabilities with your camera, that's extra helpful. But mine is just a point and shoot. Now, those scales can be reflective too. So you may have to play around with the light and shift it around to get some of the right reflections or lack of reflections off of those scales. You may have to practice with it a little bit. So you go out, you start to see some moths. How do you know what to call them? And this is one of the kind of funny things. They don't care what we call them. I mean, honestly, the moths don't care what we call them. But for us, to learn the name of a critter is like learning the password. It's like learning the password to get into the computer of information about that thing. So if I learn the name of it, that's my first step to learning more about it. For moths, it can be challenging. I just want to reassure you, it can be super challenging and discouraging to try to find out what the name for these moths are. I mean, there's like 5,000 species in Texas, so it can be challenging. There are field guides for it. This is one that came out just a couple years ago or so. The Peterson Field Guide, Seabrook Ledecky and David Beadle put this one together. It's the moths of the southeastern United States. It has maybe a couple hundred different species of moths. It's not complete. It's definitely not complete. So recognize it may not have all of them, but it's quite good. The internet can be pretty powerful, if you haven't heard. There's a lot of resources out there. This is a good one. This one has the 13,000, not pictures of all of them, but has 13,000, give or take, species of moths in North America. It can be challenging to navigate too. So Moth Photographers Group out of Mississippi State, there's a walkthrough plate series that you can click on to sort of view to see which ones look similar, not necessarily by color, but more by shape or body structure. And it gives you some guidance on how to narrow things down. I'll use Bug Guide a lot too. You can browse through the different families of these as you get more comfortable with mothing and you get more comfortable with the different groups of them. You can browse through the families. You can also submit IDs or submit images for identification. Just FYI, if you do this, make sure that they are tightly cropped. So the image just includes the moths. I've gotten yelled at a few times for submitting images that aren't properly cropped. I'm bonkers about this. I mean, it's been years. Golly, I don't even remember the last time I gave a presentation where I don't talk about iNaturalist. It is the most powerful tool I have ever touched. I used a DNA sequencer for my thesis. This is a more powerful tool than anything that I have ever touched. It's just a tool. It's just a tool, like binoculars, like a DNA sequencer, like a microscope, just a tool, but it's a tool that helps me engage with nature. And I use it to learn. I use it selfishly. I use it selfishly, well, because I have fun, but also I learn. So going to iNaturalist, if you take pictures of these, please try your very, very best to get a clear picture. With moths, once they get on the sheet or once they get behind the light, they sort of freak out a little bit, but after a while, they kind of chill out. Either they accept their fate, like, okay, fine, I see the light and I'm just going to sit here. But usually they'll just sit there. So zoom in on it with either your camera or with your phone, blast some light on there so that you can get a clear picture. That's really, really helpful on it. I also have to say the visual algorithm, the species suggestions, it's getting pretty dang good with our moths, thankful to a lot of the identifiers out there. Won't go into the nitty-gritty details on iNaturalist. It's like putting together a presentation on baseball. You know, I can go over the rules of baseball. I can show you what a glove looks like. I can show you what a bat looks like. But the best way to learn baseball is to go out and play baseball. Same thing with iNaturalist, is to go out and practice, is play with it. Yes, there's an app for it on your phone. Play with it. The website is magnificent. Play with it. Play with the website. Mark your calendars. Next year, July 23rd through the 31st of 2022. Oh my gosh. There's going to be National Moth Week. Celebrate National Moth Week by going out and observing some of the moths out there. They're out there. They are out there. If you put them on iNaturalist, they're automatically grabbed by the project, much like the Plant Week BioBlitz. If you go out and take a picture of a plant on the 17th through the 23rd, I think are the dates. If you go out and take a picture of a plant, it automatically grows to that project. The same thing with the National Moth Week. If you observe a moth, it automatically goes to that project. This is exciting. This is super exciting. If you're watching this online right now, go over to Amazon, search for this book. Lynn and Jim, they have a wonderful book. I've got a copy of the native host plants for Texas butterflies. Well, there's one for the Texas native moths, or the Texas moths, mostly native. I can't wait. I cannot wait for this book. Super, super exciting. February 6th of next year is the release date. So I'm going to put in a plug for this book. I can't wait for it. So Lynn and Jim do great books, and this is one of the ones that's coming up. So there's going to be good stuff coming out. Why? Who cares? These are the big questions, the existential questions that I am asking myself more these days. Who cares? Why are we putting out native plants? It's not just for our enjoyment. It is for habitat in general. It is for nature. As Richard Liu says or Doug Tallamy says in Nature's Last Hope, that's us and our choices and what we do with all of our actions and in our landscaping too. we can make these choices that are good, not just for our souls, for our happiness, but for all of the little critters, ones that we may not even see out there that are utilizing our plants. And when I go out to do mothing at a park or in my backyard or at another person's backyard, I can correlate the moth diversity with the plant diversity. A lot of our moths are specialists, so they're going to need a specific plant. Well, I need to put that specific plant if I want to see that specific moth. If I see that specific moth, it tells me that that specific plant is somewhere around. So it's a fun way that I correlate moth diversity with plant diversity there too. And I went crazy long. Darn it, I could talk for 3 or 4 hours on moths. I don't know if I have time for questions. I don't want to step on Rufus's toes. I know he's going to be presenting in just a second about how plants are good for birds, but plants are good for moths too. They're good for insects. If you have any questions for me, my email address, I asked the state for the longest possible email address and they gave it to me, sam.Kieschnick at tpwd.texas.gov. Holy moly, long email, but I'm probably on iNaturalist more than I am on my work email. So if you want to throw me a message on iNaturalist, I'm Sam Biology, all one word. So you can tag me if you have a moth observation or send me a message there too. And I would love to address any questions if there's time. Oh my gosh.
Sam, you have time. Rufus won't be on until 1 o'clock. So you have time to answer questions. That was wonderful. I can't wait to moth in my backyard. How fun is that going to be? Yeah, get the gear and go.
Mothing rules. It's so cool. And you know, it's funny too. It's a great way that you can be pretty sedentary. You can sit down with a beverage of choice if you would like, and just let diversity come to you. Something else I want to mention too is I get this question a lot about mosquitoes. Well, you know, here in Texas, we get lots and lots of mosquitoes. But the truth of our mosquitoes is that they tend to be crepuscular, active at dawn and dusk. So as the night goes on, as it gets darker and darker, most of our mosquitoes bail. So they're one of the other things that I have to go off on a spiel is those bug zappers. You know, those bug zappers that some folks get? I hate bug zappers. I hate them because they're effective at zapping bugs. They're not effective at zapping mosquitoes. No, they don't work very much at all for mosquitoes, but they zap a lot of our moths. They zap a lot of our non-biting midges. They zap tons of bugs, but they don't do anything really for mosquitoes. So I just have to go off on that spiel for a second there. But if you're worried about mosquitoes out there, if you can survive a little bit of the early evening, and moths are cool if you put some bug spray on, they don't care about that. So don't let mosquitoes scare you from going out and mothing. Okay, one question here. Can you also speak to the spraying for mosquitoes that cities and HRAs are doing? Sure, I can talk about that. So as an urban wildlife biologist, I get to talk to city councils, to park boards, to people making those sort of decisions about spraying. And they weigh a lot of the optics, the human optics of seeing like they are doing something. And there are mosquito sprays that, yes, do get mosquitoes. The droplets are of the right, micrometers or nanometers that impact mosquitoes. But there are a lot of other mosquito-shaped insects that exist out here that are crucial for the ecosystem. And as an urban wildlife biologist, I try to talk about these things. I try to mention that all of our actions have consequences. All of them do. They all always do. The actions when are consequences of putting a native plant in our landscape. There are consequences to that. Now, I would argue they're mostly beneficial. The consequences of mosquito spraying is, yes, you are killing some mosquitoes out there, but you're also killing off a lot of other insects. So there are more preventative measures that we can do, controlling our actions at night, or in the evening, I should say, with long sleeves, controlling standing water, all of that sort of stuff that I try to talk to those folks. But I don't envy their positions. A few years ago, Judge Clay Jenkins in Dallas had to do some mosquito spraying because of the West Nile virus. There was a flux of that. There was a little peak of that in Dallas County. So they had to make the difficult decisions to do those sort of mosquito spraying. I didn't get a chance to talk to Clay Jenkins, but I did talk to some of the city council and some of the park boards about those actions and the other things that are more efficient. Controlling water, all that, standing water, all that sort of stuff. But yes, it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge, but our role as naturalist is to provide that little bit of guidance, is to say that when we do mosquito sprays, yes, we're eliminating some mosquitoes, not all of them, definitely not all of them, but there are other things that are being impacted by it and other actions that we can do to prevent that. Long way to say that it's a pickle. It's a pickle of an issue there.
Sam,
yeah, Bill.
What about some plants? And are there any particular native plants that you can think of that are especially attractive to moths?
A great question, Bill. And the fun thing about it is diversity. Diversity is the best thing for our moths. And I think it's fun. I mean, I'm very biased. I like diversity in my landscape. So I like to see lots of different leaf shapes and flower colors and fruits and all that sort of stuff. So I would say, rather than just one type of plant, the more different species of plants that you put in your landscaping, the more diversity of moths that you'll see. So there isn't really an example of one species that I would say, toss that in your landscaping and you're going to see a whole bunch more moths. I can't really say that. I can say that if you throw dozens more species in your landscaping just to experiment with the plants, you're probably going to start to see more species of moths and more species of insects, which means more species of birds, more species of other critters out there. So, Bill, that's my answer to you. Not one plant, but multiple plants out there.
Lots of plants, lots of different kinds of plants.
Yeah, you got it. You got it.
Well, here's another question that's out in the chat. What about, I know you touched on this at least once or twice, but plants that fly, moths that fly in the daytime.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So there are some of our rule breakers. And that's what I love about biology, is we have a spectrum. And there are all of these little rule breakers out there that I think they know what they're doing. They see our textbooks and they say, I want to throw a little curveball into that general rule that moths should be active at night and not during the day. But there are examples of day flying moths. Some of the ones that I see are probably the sphinx moths, not all of them, but some of the sphinx moths, like the white line sphinx, the hummingbird clearwing, the hummingbird moth. Sometimes you'll see the corn earworm moth that flies around your lantana or your glandularia, your verbenas during the day. But there are some that just do that. Another thing that happens too, when I walk through a forest or when I walk through an area, I disturb some of those ecosystems and some of the moths will fly about. Many, if not all, no, definitely not all, but some of our moths, the places that they hide are underneath leaves. So they'll hide on the underside of leaves during the day. And then when the sun sets and the moon rises, so to speak, or the sun reflects off the moon, that's when some of them will come out and find the mate, find food, lay eggs, and all that sort of stuff. But the diurnal, that's the big scary word for daytime, or crepuscular, dawn and dusk. There are some examples of moths that do that.
Here's a question.
Oh, yes, Jim.
Oh,
Jim's mentioning the Thyrus. Is it Thyrus moth? The Forester moths, these black moths that come. I see them a lot on Mexican plum, on redbud, those early spring blooming plants. They'll fly around during the day too. Thank you very much.
and we had somebody who was wondering if the dark skies movement has any effect on this mothing.
Yeah, so there is a little bit of interesting new research out there that may be showing that some of our moths are becoming less attracted to lights because of not just the light pollution, but also the new prey or the new predators that come to our lights. If you have front lights, back lights on your porch, and you've seen some of the geckos that show up, they feast on those moths. So there are some new novel predators that live in our urban ecosystem that come to lights to feed on the moths themselves. So this may, over time, cause some of the selective pressures to be on those moths that come to lights, that they may be coming to their death. So is it enough time for natural selection to select against those species? Well, maybe, or maybe we're sort of viewing the transition right now as we become more urbanized, as there's more light pollution, that maybe some of our moths are becoming less attracted to them. I say all that to mention the dark sky initiatives, that dark skies are good for nature. That is good for nature. It's good for bird migrations, all that sort of stuff. Some of our moths migrate too. They move around as well. Other insects migrate around, and they're using the celestial bodies to navigate. So when we turn out our lights, or when we keep an area that is dark skies, yeah, that's a good thing for our insects. I also got to say that I've done some black lighting at dark skies with permission, definitely with permission of the habitat managers. I've done some at Palo Pinto Mountain State Park. I've done a little bit over at Big Bend National Park, again, with specific permission to do them. And the black lighting is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. Everything comes to those black lights. So it's pretty cool there too. So yeah, black lights, it's good for nature.
Looks like a
Black
few
skies.
people have mentioned a few other things that come out in the daytime too.
Good. Yes. Snowberry clearing, grapevine, epidemus moth. Yes, absolutely. Some of those are good ones to see during the day.
Well, we had a couple of questions earlier in the chat that about photography tips.
Yeah.
Is that anything you can add to?
Practice. Next question. No, yeah, that's really it. That's really what it is. And moths can be difficult to photograph. I mean, they can be difficult, especially if you're just starting out. They can be very difficult to photograph. The scales can be reflective. They can be crazy reflective as you either use the flash on your camera or the flash from your headlamp or a flash from a flashlight. So you may have to really play around with that light source. You may have to use a diffuser on your flash. But really, the way to get quote unquote good at it is just a lot of practice. Again, I've seen people that use these amazing cameras that I need to put a mortgage payment to get this lens, but a point and shoot can do pretty dang good with a lot of our moths. And it also goes into, what do you want the photo for? If you want to submit it to National Geographic, or if you're putting together a calendar, yeah, you'll need some of those big, fancy, highfalutin cameras. If you want to get an identification, or if you want to start keeping a collection of your backyard moths, a point and shoot or the camera on your phone can be pretty effective. So lots and lots of practice is probably the best way to do it. play with the light too. Move that light around to see about reflections.
Great. Let's see what else we have here.
Another thing too, and I know I see a lot of master naturalists on the call today. I will be doing some mothing at the conference too. So if you're going to be able to come up to Irving in a couple weeks for the Master Naturalist Conference, we'll be doing some mothing together as a group. We'll be masked, of course, but we're going to do some mothing on Thursday night at Lake Louisville. Hopefully some good mothing out there, but also we'll do some mothing outside of the hotel. And it's kind of give or take what we get with those, but sometimes on the past conferences that we've done mothing, pleasantly surprised by when we put out a UV light, something with a little different spectrum than all of the other light pollution. There's some other moths that come, and I kind of show people how to do mothing and all of that. So if you're able to do that, cool. Hopefully next year we'll be able to do more stuff in person. Again, fingers crossed, knock on wood. It's fun to go to these mothing events or black lighting events. They're so much fun to do these together with groups. And yeah, Kathy says exciting about the Weber's book. And I think there was a link that somebody tossed in about that book. You can pre-order now, and I'm going to pre-order a copy for myself too.
Fantastic. And when is the book out? You know?
January or February 6th of 2022, next year.
Okay. Well, it's been really exciting to have you on here. This was a topic I don't know much about, but I learned a lot.
Always my pleasure. And to all of you folks that are putting native plants in your landscaping, thank you. I hope that you take a few seconds, a few minutes, maybe an hour or two to go outside. And I know that your eyes look at what needs to be done. They just go everywhere and say, I need to weed this little section. I need to clean up that, or I want to do this or that. But I hope you take at least a few minutes and just sit down and listen to the whispers of gratitude that nature, is singing out there, or just by its existence. Just go out and appreciate the habitat that we're creating with the foundation of native plants. So thank you. Thank you,
Sam. Awesome presentation.
Thank you, Sam. Those are wonderful closing remarks. I'm glad this is on tape because I want to write them down.
Cool. Awesome. And big hugs. Here.
And hugs. We're
virtual
hugging.
hug there.
Okay.
Can you feel it? If you have a touch screen, you could probably feel that. I don't know. Can you feel it with your touch screen? I hope so.
I don't know. Someday. Well,